Claude responded. I've been asked more than once what I did the morning after I found my wife on that kitchen floor. I've been asked more than once what I did the morning after I found my wife on that kitchen floor. Whether I made a scene, whether I raised my voice at my own daughter. The truth is, I didn't say more than 20 words to her that whole night, and by the time the sun came up, I had already taken apart everything I'd spent 7 years building under her feet. Some of you are going to say I went too far. I've made my peace with that. But let me back up, because if I start at the end, you won't understand why I don't lose a minute of sleep over any of it. My name is Walter Combs. I'm 66 years old. My wife Riza and I have been married 31 years, and until 3 weeks ago, I would have bet everything I owned that our family was steady. Not perfect, we had our stretches. Same as anyone who stayed married 3 decades, but steady. The kind of steady that comes from paying every bill on time for 30 years, and never once making the people you love feel like they owed you for it. Our daughter Marlene is 31, smart woman, sharp tongue, good job in medical billing. She married a man named Corbin Teague about 4 years back, and Corbin's family, his father Russ, his mother Delphine. I shook Russ's hand the first time we met at the engagement dinner, and something about that handshake sat wrong with me. Too firm, too long, like he was measuring me for something. I told myself I was being an overprotective father and let it go. That was my mistake, and I want you to remember I said that, because it matters later. 3 weeks ago, I flew down to Mobile for a training certification through my old company. I'm retired now, but I still consult twice a year. Good money, keeps me sharp. I was supposed to be gone 9 days. Risa knew. Marlene knew. The whole family knew. What nobody knew, including my wife, was that the certification wrapped a day early, and instead of paying for another night in a hotel room watching cable, I booked the first flight home. Didn't call. Didn't text. 31 years married, and I still liked the look on Risa's face when I walked through a door she didn't expect me to walk through. Call it foolish. I call it romance. I landed a little after 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday. Drove myself home from the airport in the rental, instead of waiting on my son-in-law to come get me like I usually asked. And here's the detail I need you to hold on to, because I promise you it matters. When I turned onto my own street, there was a car in my driveway I didn't recognize. A gray Lincoln, polished within an inch of its life, parked at an angle like whoever owned it didn't much care whose driveway it was blocking. That feeling came back, the one from Russ's handshake. I told myself Marlene must have had company over, that people visit, that I was a tired old man reading into a parked car. I grabbed my bag and walked up to my own front door. The house had 2 sounds happening in it at once, and they didn't belong together. From the kitchen, laughter. Loud, easy, the kind of laughter that comes from people who've been sitting at a table a long while and have nowhere else to be. And from the den, just off the front hall, nothing. The wrong kind of nothing. I pushed the door open, and I saw her. Risa was on the floor of the den, her back against the leg of the reading chair she's had since before we were married, her knees pulled up, one hand pressed flat against her chest like she was holding something in. Her blouse, the pale yellow one she wears to church, had a dark patch spreading across the collar, and I felt my whole body go cold before my mind even finished the word blood. Her eyes found mine the second the door opened, and I have seen that woman cry at our granddaughter's christening, cry at sappy commercials, cry the day her mother passed. I have never seen her look at me the way she looked at me on that floor. Like she'd been holding on by her fingernails, and the second she saw my face, some part of her finally let go, because help had arrived and she didn't have to hold the line by herself anymore. I did not panic. I want that on the record. I dropped my bag, crossed that room in about 4 steps, got down on the floor with her, and called 911 with my other hand already checking her pulse. While the dispatcher walked me through keeping her upright and calm, while I was wiping a thin line of blood off my wife's lip with my thumb, I could still hear them in the kitchen. My daughter, Russ, Delphine, laughing about something, glasses clinking, like there wasn't a woman 20 feet away fighting to keep her heart rate down. I want you to sit with that a second. I had to. The paramedics made it in 7 minutes. Felt like 7 hours. 2 of them, a woman named Ostrowski who did most of the talking, and a younger fellow who worked the equipment without saying much at all. Ostrowski had the cuff on Risa within 90 seconds. and I watched her face change the way a professional's face changes when the numbers don't line up. "Mr. Combs," she said, not looking up, "your wife's blood pressure is dangerously elevated. This is a hypertensive emergency. Has she had a fall recently, or hit her head?" I told her I didn't know. I'd been in Mobile for 8 days. "There's a small laceration above her eyebrow," Ostrowski said. "Looks like she went down hard enough to catch the corner of that end table. This has probably been building for a while before it got to this point." And I looked toward that kitchen, where the laughing had finally stopped, and I felt something in my chest go from hot to something colder and much more dangerous. Steady, decided. I held Risa's hand while they got her onto the stretcher. She squeezed my fingers twice, weak but there. Twice is our signal. Has been for 31 years. I squeezed back twice and told her I wasn't going anywhere, that I'd follow the ambulance in the truck, that she just needed to breathe. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked toward that kitchen. Now, before I tell you what I did next, you need to understand something about me. I don't shout. I have never once in 66 years put a hand on furniture or a wall in anger. But I am a man who handles things, quietly and completely, and it was time to handle something. The three of them were sitting around my kitchen table like they owned the deed to it. Marlene at the head, Russ to her left, Delphine across from him, plates in front of them, with the remains of a lunch I hadn't been asked to approve. Sweet tea sweating in glasses, like it was any ordinary Thursday, in my house, while my wife bled on my floor. I stood in the doorway. Didn't say a word at first. I've learned that the angriest thing a man can do is slow down, because speed reads as panic and panic reads as weakness. Slow reads as a decision already made. Marlene stood up the moment she saw my face. I'll give her that much, some part of her already knew. "Dad," she started. I held up one finger. She stopped. I turned to Russ first. Man had his hands folded on my table like he was chairing a board meeting. I looked at him a long moment, and then I said, calm as I've ever said anything in my life, "Get out of my house." Russ blinked. Set his tea down slow, the way a man does when he wants you to know he's leaving on his own terms, and not because you told him to. Delphine touched his arm and said his name soft, the way wives do when they mean not here, not now. They walked through the den on their way out, and they saw Risa on the stretcher, oxygen mask over her face, the gauze taped above her eyebrow. Delphine stopped cold. Russ went pale as drywall. I watched the color drain right out of both their faces, and I'll tell you honestly, good. I wanted that picture burned into the backs of their eyelids for the rest of their lives. They left without another word. The door clicked shut, and the house went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. Just me and Marlene now. She stood at that table, with her arms crossed, jaw tight, her mother's stubborn chin sitting on her face like it always has, and right then those eyes couldn't decide whether to be defiant or ashamed. I sat down across from her, folded my hands. "Sit down," I said. "Talk, and I want all of it." She sat. She exhaled, dragged a hand down her face, and then it came out of her in pieces. Russ and Delphine hadn't just stopped by for lunch. They'd been planning this visit for close to a month, timed it deliberately for the week I'd be out of town, and they'd brought paperwork, real paperwork, concerning the lake cabin up in Guntersville that's been in my family since before Risa and I were married. I'd always told Marlene it would come to her one day. Russ had gotten it into his head that one day meant today, and that with enough pressure applied in the right room, they could talk Marlene into signing preliminary transfer documents that would start moving that property into Corbin's name, her husband's name, without my knowledge and without my signature. I want you to really let that land. These people sat at my table and worked on my daughter to sign away land I built a life around, while I was 400 miles away and my wife was in the next room. I kept my face still. Inside was an entirely different matter. "And your mother," I said quiet. "Where does she come into this?" Marlene looked at the table. She heard us. She came in about half an hour after they got here, heard what Russ was pushing, and she wasn't having any of it, Dad. You know how she gets. 31 years, I know exactly how she gets. She told Russ straight out the cabin wasn't mine to give away yet, that you hadn't agreed to a thing, that they had no business bringing paperwork into your house while you were out of state. Russ talked over her. She got loud back. It went back and forth a few minutes, and then she stopped mid-sentence. Said her head was pounding, said she felt dizzy, and she went to go lie down in the den, and I meant to check on her. I did. She stopped. Russ started back up again, and I got pulled back into it, and I got pulled back in, and I got pulled back in. She couldn't finish that sentence. Didn't need to. I sat with all of it, a long moment. I could hear Ostrowski's voice low, in the next room, the wheels of the stretcher rolling over the hardwood. So, let me understand you correctly, I said, and my voice had changed, and I saw Marlene notice it, saw her straighten in her chair. Your mother stood up to two people trying to steal from this family in her own home. It escalated. She told you she felt dizzy, and you went back to the table. Dad, I didn't know it was serious. She's had blood pressure problems for 8 years, I said. 8 years, Marlene. A paramedic who has never met your mother in her life understood in 90 seconds that this had been building. And you sat at that table and let it build for half an hour longer. I stood up. I don't know who's been shaping you these past 4 years, I said, but she is not the woman I raised. I walked out of that kitchen and back to my wife's side, and I did not say another word to my daughter for the rest of the night. But understand something, that silence wasn't me letting it go. That silence was me thinking. And when I go quiet like that, that's when the people who know me best start to worry. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles into a house at 2 in the morning. Not a peaceful quiet. The kind with weight to it, the kind that makes the clock on the wall sound louder than it has any right to. That's the quiet I sat in that night, in a chair pulled up beside Risa's hospital bed, after they'd run the scans, stabilized her pressure, and stitched the small cut above her eyebrow. She'd finally drifted off around one, her hand still in mine. I sat there and thought about 31 years, about the girl who married me when I had more overtime than savings. About every Sunday she spent teaching Marlene how to be decent to people, more patience than I ever managed, more grace than any of us probably deserved in the moment. I thought about her on that floor, and then I stopped thinking and I started moving. I drove home a little after 2, sat down at my desk, opened the laptop, and got to work. Understand something about me before I walk you through it. I'm not a man who acts in the heat of anything. Every decision I made that night, I'd already made hours earlier, sitting across from my daughter with my hands folded and my face dead calm. By the time I opened that laptop, I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished being angry. I was decided, and there's a world of difference between the two. First call was to the bank. 2 in the morning. Yes, but when you've held an account 30 years and you're the primary on the card, there's a number on the back that never sleeps. I'd used it twice in my whole life. This made 3. Corbin had been an authorized user on my American Express for 5 years. Groceries, gas, that conference in Biloxi that I'm fairly sure involved a casino and not a single seminar. Never questioned it. Never audited $1. Removed. Took the woman on the line under 4 minutes. Next, the truck insurance. I'd added Corbin's name to the policy back when he was between jobs. Dropped before 3 a.m. Then, the harder one. I'd co-signed Corbin and Marlene's mortgage 2 years back on that house over on Deer Run, good neighborhood, needed a co-signer with a certain credit history and a certain income, which was mine. I called the loan officer's after-hours line and left word that I wanted to begin the process of releasing my name from that obligation at the earliest legal opportunity, full cooperation on my end. Every first of the month, quiet, no announcements, I'd been wiring money into a joint account Marlene and Corbin used for household expenses. Started small when they were first married. Then it just became how things worked, the way these arrangements do when nobody ever sits down and actually talks about them. I logged in at 3:30 and canceled the standing transfer, not paused, canceled. 2. I sat back in that chair a minute after that one, because that transfer had never really been about money. It was a cushion. A version of my daughter's household I'd been quietly propping up so long that maybe, possibly, it let her husband make the kind of choices a man makes when he knows there's always somebody there to catch the fall. Not anymore. Then the calls I won't apologize for. 15 years ago, I opened a door for Corbin at the regional distribution company where I still know the plant manager personally. There's a currency built over decades that lives entirely in other people's trust, and I'd spent plenty of mine on my son-in-law, gladly, at the time. I spent the early morning hours taking it back. Called men I've known 20-some years. Told them plainly Corbin would no longer be operating under my name or my endorsement, and any courtesy extended on my account should be considered finished. Every one of them asked if I was all right. Everyone respected the call without pushing for the story. That's what 4 decades of keeping your word gets you. By 5 a.m., I'd called my attorney and left a voicemail about the Guntersville cabin. I wanted the deed restructured, ironclad, filed this week. No ambiguity left for anybody to exploit while I was out of a time zone again. Russ Teague would never get within legal reach of a single acre of that property, not in this life. I stood at the kitchen window around 6 and watched the sky go from black to gray to that pale blue that means morning's coming whether you're ready or not. Corbin showed up at my house at 9 because Marlene had called him the night before, and I imagined by morning he'd pieced together enough to know something had shifted. I watched him from the upstairs window walk up to the door, reach for his key like it was any Thursday, try it again, stand there working out what that meant. Knocked. I didn't answer. Knocked again. Phone rang from a neighbor's cell. A few minutes later, the Aldridges next door, I'd guess, watching a grown man stand confused on my porch. I let it ring twice before I picked up. There was a long silence on the line, and then his voice came through different than I'd ever heard it. The confidence gone out of it entirely. Something younger underneath. Something that reminded me, painfully, of the kid Marlene had first brought around who used to call me Sir without being asked to. You let my wife go back to a table full of thieves while her mother bled out on my floor, I said before he could get a word in. You knew about her blood pressure. 8 years you've known, and when it mattered most, you went back to your lunch. Silence. I could hear him breathing. I love my daughter, I said. That's not in question, and never will be. But love isn't the same thing as access, and every door I've held open for the two of you is closed as of this morning. Longer silence this time. For how long? He finally asked. Quiet. Until you become the kind of man who doesn't need somebody else to answer that question for him. I hung up. I walked back into the guest room where I'd finally allowed myself 2 hours of sleep, and by 10 I was back at the hospital. Risa was sitting up, color back in her face, tired but herself, looking at me the way she does when she already knows something's happened but she's waiting for me to say it. Is everything all right? She asked. I sat down, took both her hands, and looked at her the way you look at somebody when you almost lost them and you need 1 full second to be grateful you didn't. Everything, I said, is handled. She studied my face a long moment, and then she nodded slow and leaned her head against my shoulder. And outside that hospital window, I knew my daughter was sitting somewhere with a canceled card, a released mortgage, and a husband who no longer had a single favor left in this town that carried my name. Some of you are going to say I was too hard on her. Maybe I was. But I watched a stranger in a paramedic's uniform understand my wife's crisis faster than my own daughter did, and I decided somewhere in that quiet at 2 in the morning that the last real gift I had left to give Marlene wasn't another open door. It was finally letting her feel the cold air when one closes. She'll grow from that or she won't. That part isn't up to me anymore. Risa is alive. She is safe. She is, this morning, finally home. And that is the only part of this whole thing that I will never for 1 second regret. Claude responded. Love isn't measured by how many doors you keep open for someone. It's measured by what you're willing to close when it's the only way to wake them up. Love isn't measured by how many doors you keep open for someone. It's measured by what you're willing to close when it's the only way to wake them up. The people who matter most sometimes need to feel the weight of a consequence before they can find their way back to who they really are. Hold on to your family fiercely, but never let comfort excuse cruelty. That's how real love protects itself and still leaves the light on. A small note for you. This story was imagined and written by AI purely for entertainment, though we hope its gentle life lesson still finds a place in your heart.